Welcome to Nothing Ventured with me, Aarish Shah. This is the podcast where we explore the people and stories that make up the tech and venture ecosystem. Don't forget to subscribe, like, rate, and share the podcast because it really helps us get the word out to more people who are curious about understanding even more about the world of venture capital. This season of Nothing Ventured is sponsored by Odin. Odin helps angels, VCs, and founders to raise and deploy capital seamlessly. You can structure your SPVs and now run your funds, handle capital calls, portfolio management more smoothly and easily in one place. Founders use Odin to raise their entire round in a few clicks by simply sending investors a link and receiving investments immediately. Odin works with over 5,000 investors and over 150 emerging fund managers and angel syndicates globally. Head to joinodin.com to learn more. That's joinodin.com. Hello and welcome to another episode of Nothing Ventured with me, Aarish Shah. Today in the studio with me, I had Francesco Perticarari. Francesco is general partner at Silicon Roundabout Ventures, a specialist fund investing in engineer-led deep tech entrepreneurs. The fund grew out of Silicon Roundabout, the largest tech meetup community in Europe, which Francesco co-founded and in 2017 made it focus on deep tech and helping entrepreneurs develop their business from pre-seed to Series A. Apart from having been a serial techie himself as developer, tech lead, and CTO, Francesco has also mentored startups for the European Global Navigation Systems Agency, European Space Agency. In today's episode, we talked about unicorns are dead and titans are here to stay. Deep tech is anything where technology is an integral part of the risk and reward as well as the moat of the business. Defense and strategic chain repatriation are giving drive to the growth of deep tech building and investing in Europe. The European ecosystem needs to be more joined up, not less, and that deal by deal is too slow in deep tech, hence the birth of Silicon Roundabout Ventures. Let's get straight into it. Francesco, it's absolutely amazing to have you here in the studio with me. I think this has been a long time coming, so I'm really glad we finally managed to make it work. But for our audience, to get to know you a little bit better, I'd like to go through a bit of a quick fire with you. So can you tell us what your first job was?
Thank you, Aarish. Great being with you. My first job was warehouse clerk that quickly turned into warehouse clerk and wholesale fruit and veg salesperson in a fruit market.
Okay.
In a small town in Italy.
Okay. And what did you do before you got into the tech and venture ecosystem?
Computer science, software engineering.
So you've always been in there. Okay. And what triggered your move to found Silicon Roundabout and eventually Silicon Roundabout Ventures?
So the Silicon Roundabout, I kind of stepped into it half accidentally by being an Italian in London that wanted to connect with other engineers and get into tech. So I joined as a late co-founder the group, the three people that set up the Silicon Roundabout meetup, and when basically everyone else later on kind of started doing their own things and leaving, I took the reins to focus on deep tech and building this community with a purpose to support these founders. Eventually, that got me into angel investing after realizing that some of the companies that we had seen almost, firsthand at the very, very earliest days, and some of which ended up winning these competitions, had gone on to do really, really well, and they almost had this venture profile. And so that combined with the fact that our focus shifted more and more, and today is exclusively on deep tech and especially hardware or very low-level software, and the realization that wasn't very well catered in Europe. So I thought there was both the opportunity of having built something that now seemed to finally have found its purpose, realizing that would have also been almost like my life dream, and out of the angel investing, that it was something that I was getting really passionate about. And then, and then it all kind of then got together, and Silicon Roundabout Ventures came out of wanting to scale that up.
Amazing. What would you be doing if you hadn't gotten into venture?
What would I have been doing if I didn't go? Well, I love building tech, so I would probably, and I still try to code a little bit, even though now it's my venture partner Ralph that does all of the tech development. Every now and again, I try to at least do something because I love the actual building of tech. So yeah, I would build tech.
Okay, amazing. And let's talk about Silicon Roundabout Ventures. So what stages and verticals, what geographies, and I guess it's not a traditional fund, so you don't really have an AUM per se, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean, the structure is a traditional fund.
Okay.
It's a limited partnership. We're still in the process of doing the final closing, and right now we've got a couple of million of which we've deployed half. We're looking to get to 5. We've got a hard cap at 10, so it's still gonna be a first check fund. That's though let's say the business, the financial side is attached on top of the community, which still is live. We continue to do events. As of this recording, which is probably gonna come out later, but we're gonna do next week an event, for instance. But there's gonna be more. So even when it does go out, you'll probably find events that are still happening, and it's continuing with the same ethos of having people that have gone beyond coming back to pay it forward and share their journeys, like XCD founders or growth stage founders or venture funds, investors, partner GPs. We had Sequoia's, Amadeus, GraphCore on startups like that. And then every now and again organize opportunities for very, very early pre-seed, seed, even barely studied.
Idea stage, yeah.
Well, I mean, idea in deep tech is not really the case ever, because normally there would be a list, a patent or something. But yeah, let's call them idea-ish.
Pre-launch. Yeah, pre-launch,
to come and present your technology and what you're trying to build. And yeah, so we keep doing a few of these. Last year we did one virtually to cater for the whole of Europe. So yeah, that's still going.
Amazing. And if you talk about 3 companies from inside or outside the portfolio that you're excited about, what would those be?
3 companies. Well, right now in the portfolio, it's so difficult to say because I love them all. Right now there is, for example, a defense tech company, Green Jets, that I'm very excited about what they've managed to achieve being a pre-seed company still. I mean, they might be seed by the time this goes out, but again, I love everyone equals, but I love the fact that when I met the founders, the company still didn't exist, and they spun out having already committed to them. Another company that I want to mention, so to take off the pressure of talking about portfolio companies, I can be, let's pick one outside. Garden, it's an agri-tech company, was probably the very last one of the Silicon Roundabout community companies that we kind of found and that I got excited about, where I didn't invest in because I remember still effectively deciding, okay, I want to be an angel, and then speaking to the founders, realizing the round had just closed the week before, and realizing how that made me feel pushed me totally into angel investing, and they're still doing great. And then another company, well, okay, again, not in terms of how good I think the company is, because I think so far all of our 7 investments are great. But for example, there is one where the founder is called Panagia, where the founder Pahini. I've seen her struggle with the European landscape of venture, and instead of just claiming, oh, this is all terrible, it's crap, let's give up. She went to the US, closed a bunch of investors over there, closed partnerships and contracts over there. So it's now actually really turned an adversity into an asset. And I think that, that's something that I love about companies. And I've seen it doing even at funds level. It happened to us as well, where some things that you would be frustrated for forever, think that it might even put the last nail on a coffin for you, actually becomes a strength if you go through it.
Everything becomes an opportunity.
Yeah,
for sure. One final question, as you're Italian, deep dish or thin and crusty pizza?
Oh, no, thin. I mean, it doesn't, what? Is this a question? Seriously, come on. Aarish.
Had to ask.
The second one is not the first one is not a pizza. It's a pie, I guess, or whatever else you want to call it.
All the Americans
not a pizza.
All the Americans are going to at me in the comments for sure. Thank you so much, Francesco. We're going to dive straight into the main podcast, but really appreciate you taking the time.
Cool.
Francesco, great to have you in the studio with me, and really interesting to have understood a little bit more about kind of where you've come from and how you got into venture. But you are very much a deep tech investor, right? And have been for some time. Until recently, most people had only really seen the world of tech through the lens of Mark Andreessen's famous "Software is Eating the World" essay. So why do you think deep tech doesn't get as much play? And do you think that that's changing now? Are we seeing that pivot to kind of atoms over bits? I'm certainly seeing more of that in the deep tech space than I used to, and it certainly seems that there has been a quite significant shift in that direction. But I'd love to get your perspective.
I mean, that's already happened. I wrote an article recently called "Unicorns Are Dead: The Age of Titans Begins," and it's all about that. And one of the essays and articles we quoted in there actually comes from Mark Andreessen. So the very same person that 20 years ago talked about software now has talked about that it's time to build.
Yeah.
And A16Z launched an American dynamism practice that is focused on resilience technologies, which means deep tech, with a flavor of defense. So it's already happened. In the US, it's actually, I would say, it's become mainstream within the space that, between the software crash after
so
2021.
Sort of crypto, software crash, AI, and deep tech.
Yeah, basically, with OpenAI going mainstream and the dip out of 2021 in the US, it's already a fact. It's established, especially with this whole defense. There are even memes of people saying like they now do deep tech and defense in America. It's not the same in Europe, probably because my guess of that is that there were not players like Andreessen Horowitz or Founders Fund, where if the founders and the partners level team decided they want to go full steam ahead into something like deep tech, they would have the capital and the brand to basically shift and become a major player quickly. We've not seen that happening from the Atomicus and Speed Invest, even though they have increased their deep tech, maybe hiring a deep tech partner or whatever. There hasn't been that major shift of just saying, hey, we're going to do this. It might be because capital in Europe comes a lot from institutional money and they kind of lock you in with LPA. So you probably cannot just decide one day you're going to do defense, So, but it's happening here as well. And in a way, I see it as an opportunity for people like me, and not just me, other funds, that maybe specialize more in, other areas where we maybe do less, like synthetic biology or other things. I think this power vacuum is an opportunity, because I think the quality of founders is now exactly the same. People would disagree with that. I think Europe today, in terms of quality of seed, is on par with the US.
Okay.
But in deep tech, you don't have yet a monopoly of major players that would take over the entire space. So if you want to build a fund, probably deep tech is a good area to start. I'm definitely doing that, right?
Yeah, well, for sure. And I mean, it's interesting. There's a couple of things that come out of there. We're going to have on the podcast in a few weeks, someone that is building very much a fund in the defense. Well, actually, interestingly, not just in defense. So they're looking at twin track sort of use cases. So use cases that are usable within the consumer environment, but also within the defense environment. And their background is actually military for many years. But interestingly, I did a podcast with Theo Priestley, who's a kind of futurist. I was on his podcast, which I think is called Days of Future Past. And we were talking about, when I was growing up, what did I expect the future to look like? And are we there? And one of the questions he asked was, if you had to think about one thing that happened during your childhood that maybe, stopped the future becoming what you think it is. I had to think about it for a second, but I actually think that one of the things was actually the Cold War ending, right? So defense spend in general stopped, right? Or not that it stopped, but that focus on defense kind of dried up a fair amount. And so many of those kind of really incredible technologies that we see today, so whether it's the World Wide Web, so the internet itself, whether it's GPS, whether it's other technologies like that, came out of kind of military research, right? And I wonder whether that sort of certainly, and because here in Europe we don't have a common defense budget, I guess, right, is the best way of putting it. We don't have necessarily that same magnitude and capacity that the US has been able to build. And then when you couple that with a lack of growth capital, large pools of capital, which deep tech often, though not always, requires, it just means that Europe has maybe fallen a little bit behind. But I think it's really interesting that you say, the opportunity is there right now, the caliber of the founders, the opportunity to find investors like yourself and others has never been better, right?
Yeah, no, I mean the landscape is kind of ripe for it, and it's happening, and there's more capital going to it. I also think that the growth stage lack of capital is I mean, yes, obviously we don't have a strong ecosystem in Europe yet, but on by the same token, it's easier to bridge, and I'm seeing it bridge, like being bridged. If a US fund wants to invest in a European company, it doesn't really matter if it's deep tech or not, as long as it has potential, right? Because by the point you want to raise Series B and beyond, even if you're deep tech, you would have some metrics. And I mean, even if it's not, first of all, it doesn't have to not be revenue, because I have in the portfolio companies that are doing crazy things as quantum computing, closing contracts, so or about to, or having pilots that then lead to contracts. So I don't think that a company needs to claim that they need to raise $1 billion before they need, there
before they can commercialize.
There might obviously be some very specific cases in which it might happen, but it doesn't have to be. And on the flip side, with the market that we have today, companies that were even on that trajectory and did pivot, and they have good traction and or started to have. So there is US money, then there is corporate money, and then there is generalist fund money. Because again, if you're looking at Series B, even if your thesis has always been on software, I've seen deals now being done where companies are not. And I think that's just going to be more and more, people would tweak their mandate, and more and more deals will be done. I mean, we have Molten Ventures as an LP, and they're a A+ fund, and they never declare themselves a deep tech fund. They're not, but they're increasing the number of deals that are happening in deep tech. And I think that is not because it's like other trends where it's like, oh, it's hyped and we need to get into it. I think it's just a matter of the fact that there are amazingly great deep tech companies out there that can not only change the world, because all the VCs like to say that, they are creating impact and value in very difficult industries, from industrial materials to defense to climate hardware to security, and all sorts of other things, health. So it's just a matter of picking the best deals, and I think some of the best companies are deep tech and will be increasingly be deep tech.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so there's a couple of things again that come out of there. So I think, because one of the questions I had was, okay, where do these companies go for that growth capital, once they get post kind of Series A? And to your point, there is corporate capital, there are... Hey guys, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to introduce you to our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Emerge One. Emerge One CFOs partner with VC-backed founders from seed to Series B to manage and raise capital and plan how it should be deployed, controlling cash so that they can do what they do best to scale strategically. You can find them at emergeone.co.uk. That's emergeone.co.uk. Okay, let's get back to the episode. There are revenue streams that you can lock into, and then there's obviously the US as well. But I guess one thing to unpick maybe that is critical to this conversation is what do you, when you think about deep tech, what do you mean? Because I think I've been on a bunch of chats where some people say, well, deep tech is AI, and others saying no, it's only hardware. Others saying, well, it's maybe in health or something else, or life sciences, for argument's sake, right? So I guess one question is that. The second, not question, but I think point that correlates to what you're saying is, not only are some of these portfolios shifting towards, or investors shifting towards kind of deep tech, I would imagine part of that is also because cost of building software is dropping, especially with the rise of AI. And therefore, those companies probably are going to require less capital over the course of their lifetime to grow. And therefore, those pools of capital need to then find a different home. And I wonder whether that's part of the shift that's also happening. But yeah, I'd love to get your take on what is deep tech from your perspective.
I think it's marketing bullshit.
Okay, great.
I mean, like...
That should go straight to camera, yeah.
Marketing bullshit. So my first attempt at defining what I wanted to build was that I wanted to build an institution that would back, how how was the line? It was something like next generation technologies in computers and physical science. I think that statement is still up on the website somewhere. And because it's more akin to the truth. And if you wanted to continue, there can be infrastructure, picks and shovels, infrastructure players in the technology space. Now, that's obviously a mouthful. So the first time I pitched it to one of my early mentors that was sort of helping me become a VC, I guess, from nowhere, he listened, no, you're a deep tech investor.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And I was like, okay.
Just shorthanded.
That's it.
Yeah. Okay.
So I guess in practice, it's anything where technology is a defining part of the risk and the reward and the defensive mode. So I think the majority of AI today is not, because the majority of AI today doesn't need to be built in-house. And whether you're turning LLMs into something specific, super vertical, or whether you're at the application level. Right?
Yeah.
It's a little bit like when cloud became a thing. If you said that you build your server stack in-house, what's the advantage, right? You just use AWS, or like later on even the next iterations of stuff built on top of AWS. So there's always a layer, right? So if you have a genuine reason for building something different, for instance, like taking LLMs from just a Google research paper into mainstream adoption at like hardware level, having infrastructure, big training, big money spent. Sure, okay, I think that's already happened. There is clearly OpenAI is the leading player, and a few others now catching up with a lot of money, if they can. I think the next AI that is worth building is probably somewhere very like where in the biology space or in the security space. If you find ways in which you cannot use a general purpose AI by any mean, and not even today, like next 5 to 10 years, you literally can't, and you're hyper convinced about that, or you come up with a different model, maybe even taking something that right now is still pure academic research and turning, because DeepMind, that what it was. It wasn't sure what it was going to do, but it's commercialized deep learning, and then now OpenAI turn LLMs into something mainstream. I'm sure there would be more to it. I don't believe that can go on record. Let's see if people prove me wrong. We're not gonna have AGI this year. It's not gonna come just from the LLMs. There is gonna have to be more. A little bit like our brain is probably a combination of systems. And it takes the energy of lighting up a light bulb to have this going. So to me, it's something that takes so much to train, and to be honest, it's still shit. Very
basic things.
Very thing. There is something fundamental that that is a great system, but it cannot be the end all. Not a lot of money is going into people that would say, I've got a new AI system from scratch. I've seen a couple. I wasn't convinced that it was anything substantial other than people trying to catch the hype. But I think it's going to happen. Right now, maybe a year ago, maybe today, maybe next year, somebody would be building something that is basically a different model. And that would create new results by some different training.
Or potentially you have amalgamation of quantum and AI, and therefore...
That's probably going to take some time.
A bit more time for that. No, so interestingly, I think I mentioned I had Charles Sidman on the podcast a few days ago. He's an investor at ECS Capital over in the US, and he was building machine systems and AI, I don't know, 40, 50 years ago, or what would be considered AI today, 40, 50 years ago. And his take is that he doesn't believe in the intelligence part of artificial intelligence, like as we sit today. So because AI systems today cannot get to, and we're kind of digressing here, but I think it's an interesting point to digress on, because AI systems cannot they can map the world, but they can't understand the world, right? In the same way that the human brain can. It can provide you with a set of options, but you're always going to need a human actor to interact with that AI for it to be valuable, right? And I think what we've managed to do is fool ourselves that because we can chat to the AI in a near human way, or we can talk to Alexa, or we can talk to Siri, we have anthropomorphized the AI and almost convince ourselves that it is near human or near AGI, because it is so much beyond what we have been used to. But actually, when you look under the hood, it's still I mean, very simplistically, a set of algorithms that is predicting based on statistical analysis, whereas often some of the most interesting things that come out are in the outliers, not in the general data, right? So, I just had Siri pop up.
There we go, another Siri.
Exactly. But so to go back to your point around sort of hardware, or not hardware, deep tech. So deep tech, it's marketing bullshit. I think I probably would buy into that. AI, currently a lot of the application level systems that are being built would not be considered deep tech from your perspective. Hardware possibly, where that, again, to your point, where technology is an integral part of the risk reward and the moat. So can any type of software be considered deep tech from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. Like again, if it's something at the low level that, in the biology space or security space, or like simulate, like if there is a rationale for a strong R&D, where you're taking a risk on an engineering risk that will pay off and be a meaningful moat against competition, then I think it is. Because look, to be fair, categories are never clear cut. There is always a shade of gray, and to me, the shade of gray where I want to concentrate investing is that shade where there is less competition risk and more technological risk. And I think, again, there isn't a clear-cut thing, but basically what I ask myself is, if I back this founder, because it's ultimately, we talk about companies, but to me, even in deep tech, it's about the founders. And I don't believe in mass accelerators that would turn every PhD just because they have great research into entrepreneurs, or any non-technical people, pair them up with a technical person, and suddenly there's going to be a huge company. I think most deep tech businesses will be led by technical people. So I'm one of those that believe in that, but I don't believe it's something that you can kind of teach at scale, just because every university would love to have 100 successful spin-outs every year. It's not going to happen, right? With all that said, even in software, if you find a real genuine reason for a company that is going to be heavily R&D company in the early days, and that will fend off competition for a while, so that you don't have 20 copycats just because VCs realized that was cool and they're going to give money to your competitor, then sure, it can be.
Yeah. Okay.
We have 1 out of 7. So, there's...
Okay. Well, that's significant. I mean, like, that's not insignificant for sure. So switching tack a little bit, right? There's been a recent rise in defense and strategic supply chain repatriation. So what I would, I guess, term reshoring, in part due to kind of the global political landscape and a move away from reliance on China. How has that acted as a catalyst for kind of deep tech company building and investing?
Oh, it's one of the major catalysts and one of the trends that I kind of suspected for a while. And as the clouds of the new war started to come together, I'm not even talking about Ukraine. That's just a very evident symptom, but we just had to look at what was happening between China and the US already for several years. Deglobalization started happening some years ago. It was just normal that everything you said, the reinsuring, the resilience, the tech sovereignty, whatever you want to call it, had to happen. So that is continuing to happen. I believe that's going to continue to happen. I believe we're not going in a better world. We're going in a worse world. And if you want to use technology, then that's a strong push. Governments are trying to work more with startups in that space. There's more grants available. There are more grants available. Corporations also need to think about their goals, and so that brings more capital in, all in that space. And that's just going to continue to grow. So I think it is already a major reason. It was definitely one of my strongholds in my thesis. And it becomes just bigger and bigger by the month. NATO launched the fund, spoke to a couple of their partners, and I can see where they're going, and it's just fully aligned with what we're doing. And I think that's just going to continue to happen. Yeah.
I mean, interesting. My background, my original background is manufacturing, and I fully agree that, we spent a lot of time talking about software in general within the tech kind of ecosystem. But actually, when you get down to it, and I have a guest that's coming on, Renan de Villiers from OSS Ventures. Like, they are specifically only building tech to be deployed in manufacturing operations or in operations, because I think his statistics were something like 50% of jobs are still at operation level, right? Like 25% of GDP comes from that sector, and actually not focus. But it's also one of these sectors which has lagged behind in terms of investment and renewal of the technologies, if I can put it that way. So actually giving yourself a core advantage by building good technology that can solve, food production or medicine production or whatever it might be, right? But all those fundamental things that we are seeing in the UK having drastically kind of changed post Brexit, especially, right, where our supply chain infrastructure isn't what it needs to be, but also we don't have onshore manufacturing capabilities for so much of this stuff. You start seeing that on the supermarket shelves, in the pharmacies, and in hospitals or wherever. Actually refocusing on that basic fundamental level and improving that infrastructure seems like a no-brainer, right?
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And the thing is that it's basically made 90%, if not more, maybe 100% of deep tech related to defense-ish type of insecurity type of aspects.
Yeah.
Because, say, literally, I can go through the 7 investments we've made. The first one is in climate hardware. What, in the battery space, what that's got to do? Well, if you want to repatriate the battery supply chain, you've got to find ways in which you're less dependent on rare minerals somewhere else. You also want a player that is based here, and potentially where let's say in this case is cathode, the cathode part of the battery, even though it might be either more expensive or different, more technically challenging, actually gives you strong advantages. So you're not competing with the East on price, because you're never going to, but your technology advantage is so big that actually is worth investing in a startup, having a contract with someone like them. Second one is, again, it's in, actually that's dual use, so there we go, take the box. And then, we're going through, and then another one in quantum, another one in the battery recycling. So like even the quantum, then a semiconductor, we're gonna do a quantum one now, another one, and all of these, okay, there's nothing to do directly to defending anything. We're not talking about anything directly military application. Well, but you probably still want to be the leader of the next generation of chips. We see how NVIDIA is effectively dictating terms to countries, right? Because, if they delay the supply let's say they want to delay the supply of AI chips to Germany, what a major weapon that is, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, countries are forcing ASML and NVIDIA to maybe be less friendly with the East, because they know that if they force that to happen, the East suffers. Then we see Elon Musk visiting countries like Israel or Ukraine ahead of 95, maybe 98% of all the world leaders. It's the US president,
British,
couple of, sometimes he went before the British, what I mean? And I think that's probably, after Brexit, that's probably going to continue to happen more. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah, you're allowed to say that.
In a UK podcast.
Anything goes on this podcast. It's fine.
Well, unfortunately, because
I'm a bit of a Brexit hater.
I do believe that Europe has major potential, and the UK is the leader in tech, VC, in the UK.
I think there was an article out today that suggested, or that reaffirmed London and the UK's kind of place at the top of the sort of tech ecosystem within Europe.
But just because you're the leader, I don't think you should take that as saying, oh, I can go alone because I'm the leader. I think you should lead and take advantage of the ecosystem you've got that can be around, and in fact create leaders around you, because then you're stronger together. But anyway, that's more of a different political argument. The whole thesis, topic that I was trying to answer was more, everything that is at that level of sophistication, it turns into something that a country or an ecosystem or a bunch of countries, NATO, is US and Europe, want to have within their borders. So even if it's battery recycling, even if it is a new type of agri-tech kind of technology, even if it is computing, it's still about resilience. Right? Whereas a CRM or an app that helps you socialize, not really, right?
Who care? And I think you said it right. So defense and security is the phrase that you use. And I think most of us, when we think about defense and security, we're thinking about military stroke sort of civil defense situations. But actually, food security is a massive thing. Climate security, all of those sort of issues fit within that defense and security kind of sphere, because it is about ensuring that, to your point, your nation can remain resilient against either attacks or, if not attacks,
supply chain disruptions, right?
Exactly, right? Amazing. Now, switching tack once again, and we've talked about this, I think you and I before, but I've had a number of European VCs on the podcast recently, notably a spate of Italians like yourself. Do you think that the ecosystem here is as joined up as it could be? And I think this goes to your point just now, or should be, or alternatively, does it need to be joined up at all? And it sounds like you definitely don't think that it shouldn't be joined up. It sounds like you think it should be more joined up, if anything.
Yes, that is one of the things that I keep advocating. We should be more collaborative. And the thing is that everybody that is actually a leader in the space, even the ones that unfortunately have to carry forward a political mandate, under Chatham House or Fight Club rules, they all hope the same, right? Yeah. In venture, I still have to find a person, a real smart person that thinks otherwise. In practice, politics sometimes get in the way, and that's a shame. But I do think that eventually people are starting to realize that maybe you have to say something and then behind the scene work kind of to fix it. And that's kind of my hope. I think NATO has done something irrespective of what happens in practice in terms of returns and what they do in investing with the NIF, which, they still need to announce what they've been doing in the last few months. Just the fact that it happened.
Yeah. That it exists.
Yeah, an institutional fund for Europe that is backed by governments and that is across European countries, including the UK and including non-EU countries. I think just the fact that it exists is a glimmer of hope, because I think we should go into that direction of, if we have a unicorn in deep tech or defense or whatever in Germany, that's beneficial for all the countries there, free democratic countries that believe in the open and world that we were kind of building up until recently.
I know we said we wouldn't talk about it, but you've opened the door, because the reality is we're likely facing a Trump-Biden election later this year. There is I think, strong chance that Trump could win, despite my own feelings, I guess, about it. But and again, my feelings count for nothing, because I'm neither a US citizen and have nor have any skin in that game. But Trump has been quite vocally anti-NATO, or at the very least been needling, European countries to pick up their sort of pick up the slack in terms of how much funding they have provided to NATO. And I think Europeans are now thinking about that, because they can see that on the horizon, that there is something happening. But I think if the US were to pull out, that could be quite detrimental, obviously, to NATO, but to your point, to the NATO investment fund. That is it? Yeah, is it the NATO investment fund or the infrastructure? I can't remember now.
Could be innovation or investment, actually.
Yeah. Whichever it is. Okay, we should. We'll go back.
I lost any hope of getting any money from them in the future. There you go.
That's right. Damn it. Okay, we'll edit that out. Yeah. No, we won't. We like to keep everything.
No, it's fine.
But I mean, it could have a potentially huge impact, right? Because the US has been such a strong part of NATO from that perspective.
Look, the thing is, I believe this is kind of reconciling. I think, and venture is actually educating me into this, reconciling the fact that you hope for certain things and they would probably be better off for everything else. However, challenges are opportunities. Normally you make money when there is a problem.
Of course.
Now, and venture is about making money, and company building in many cases is about, creating that circle of finance. So in a weird way, when there are challenges, you should fight against them, of course, if you don't believe they're right, and we should all lobby for a better world. But at the same time, I don't think lobbying is enough and hoping that the politicians or whoever is in charge of stuff would fix them. I think you can also then solve the problem if it's a commercially solvable problem. Sure. That way, the NIF, as far as I know, their capital doesn't come to the US, so that wouldn't really be affected in that. Obviously huge political consequences, but at least I'm not part of the team. But I for what I've heard discussing with them, that shouldn't affect the pot of money. And again, that is a sign, because again, say SpaceX is, advancing space exploration and exploitation. It almost kickstarted the next space race by showing that it can be done commercially. So, NASA was struggling and nobody was even thinking of going to the moon. Now there are commercial startups that, on the inspiration of SpaceX, are fully privately funded, VC-backed funded companies are looking to help NASA get back on the moon. So it's what I'm trying to say is, whatever happens, we should kind of try and lobby and the politicians to fix it. But at the same time, if things do go south, what can we do to take those to solve those problems ourselves as entrepreneurs, as VC funds, as whatever, even outside of ventures? Like, we can have an impact.
Yeah, I mean, out of adversity comes opportunity, right? And the most, I think, recent example clearly is it wasn't governments necessarily that came up with a vaccine during the pandemic. It was private enterprise, right?
Actually, startups, literally, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, like, it's one of the things that I've always struggled with ever since I've sort of been involved in the venture kind of space, is that I guess I had a very sort of rose-tinted glasses view of venture, that venture was about funding innovation. And then someone told me, no, venture is about making money. I was like, oh, okay, well, that sucks. But it also then started making more sense why some venture dollars were flowing into stupidity like 50-minute grocery and so on and so forth. But I think what is wonderful about venture is, yes, it's about making money. The innovation that happens as a result of that may be a byproduct of the end goal of making money, but the innovation is also what is making the money, right? And so VC funds look for strong returns on their capital. Now, very clearly, one of the ways of doing that is by finding businesses that, to your point, right, have technology as an integral part of the risk and reward and as a moat to their business, right? Because they are defensible and they can grow into large markets, hopefully, right? So I think, that aspiration that innovation can be the solution, I think works a lot better in the US, as in, not works a lot better, but, in the US, you have a ton of innovation, then only after the innovation, maybe some regulation comes in. In Europe, it goes the other way around. The regulation comes in, you've got to innovate around the regulation and hope that things work. But I think what I guess I'm trying to say is that, to your point, innovation is going to happen irrespective of the political landscape that we're in. And I think we should all be very, very happy that innovation by entrepreneurs, by founders, by VCs continues to happen, because, certainly looking around, I don't think, governments have proven themselves to not be capable of that level of innovation or innovative thinking. However, they are often the first to adopt those innovations once they are built and once they have, proven themselves out. That was a bit of a ramble. My apologies, but I again, things I feel strongly. I mean, one of the reasons I feel very strongly about this sort of stuff is I was born in Africa. I spent many years in Papua New Guinea, all kind of developing economy countries, and the innovation that happens often in those economies is so breathtakingly more essential and life-changing and transformational to populations than half of the stuff that we build in Europe, right? Because, or in Europe or the US for that matter, because some of the things that they are trying to change affect people at a grassroots level fundamentally in their ability to exist, right? So whether that is things like M-Pesa, there's a business that we're potentially going to be working with that's in the logistics space that is, a marketplace for logistics, right? Where in Africa, I don't know what the stats are, but one would imagine that a large proportion of their logistics is road transport, right? But it's all very fragmented. So they've been able to bring that together and make that system more efficient. So, and I think then governments kind of sit on top of that, and where they see that is actually going to be, a really valuable part of their infra, they then become buyers of that product, right? And I think that is the opportunity. So irrespective of the adversity we see, hopefully that opportunity will continue to flow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. I mean, there is an element of course, making businesses sustainable, and there is the financial aspect, and that is in a way the thing that keeps it alive. Now, the caveat is that I also think that as things get successful, some regulation is needed,
Yep.
and in some cases, especially when you start to have monopolistic type of entities, it's something to be looked at. Even in venture, the fact that mega funds never struggle to raise despite not always being the best returners. But effectively stopping and in a way suffocating other funds to come up,
because they're hoovering up the capital.
Yeah, and the same in tech. Silicon Valley created lots of companies, but some of the early winners are now continuing to be companies, and they're so big that they're wiping out with M&As. Now that's okay for smaller funds because you get exits, but in a way it limits the amount of companies that can go public. Before in the 90s, that was almost like it was easier. You needed less rounds, and
and you go public after a couple of rounds and 100 million in revenue, if that, right?
Yeah.
Or even less.
So
right?
I think I am obviously a capitalist. It's in my title now. Not an engineer anymore. I'm a venture capitalist, but I do think that some regulation is good, and when you get bigger, I think that the importance is to allow the free enterprise and the experimentation at the ground level.
Yeah.
And then watch out for monopolies to arise. And I don't, and I think the US is now even at legal level starting to consider whether some of the companies they're so big that they're starting to suffocate even local innovation. So, that's something that potentially the debate is still open.
Yeah. Amazing. So we're going to talk about Silicon Roundabout Ventures for a second, right? It is an LPGP fund, but it's a slightly different flavor of fund. Because you pull capital from other angels and funds and invest and co-invest with LPs in the ventures that you back, right? So why did you decide to build a fund in this way rather than going for just a more kind of traditional fund structure? And what benefits as well as challenges has that brought to you in terms of how, when, and where you deploy?
Well, there's been a lot of trial and error during the process. I first started to conceptualize the idea of doing something business-wise with the community that would have an element of investing with an old friend of mine back in 4 years ago, around the time when I studied angel investing. But I wasn't sure what. Then I've done a couple of syndicates there for companies where it was actually not just me, but other people, and realized that doing it at deal by deal level was too slow for deep tech, and it didn't allow really to build the firm behind it. Then we went to speak to the easiest LPs to find, the government ones, and we realized I was wasting a lot of time because it was basically never good enough, but also even when it was good enough, it would still take forever. And then even then, by the time it started to look like what they expected, then it looked nothing like what I wanted to do. Yeah. And so I was like, enough of this, I'd probably not worth doing it. And then the inspiration came from a person, a couple of people that I was chatting at the time that were like, listen, actually, we're struggling with you because you're trying to do this thing and it's too traditional, but we like your story, we like your community. Why don't you do something just yourself and you start small and you prove your point? And then I started to meet people that had done that, like Stefano Bernardi, another Italian that did that with a 3 million fund, 3 people, and now he's got another fund. We've co-invested actually because he also likes crazy stuff. So, but besides the investment side, even just the personal level, the fact that someone told me, look, I've done it. I started very small, and you build a non-government tied type of fund series and franchise, and that was all I needed. The fact that I was like, okay, well, I can start small. I can do it small enough that, and the last piece was the tech has come to help. We're using Vauban, which has been acquired by Carta. There are now, at that time, it was the only one that would do it in Europe. Otherwise, you could do a rolling fund on Angel List in the US.
Of course, we have Odin now, who are a sponsor.
Yeah, now you've got more. Obviously.
I actually just met someone randomly as I was walking down to the studio, who is married to a distant relation of mine, and she mentioned that they have built a fund administration platform called, I think it was Capricorn, which I hadn't heard of before. So
No, and that's the thing that
there's
now, obviously, Paddy and Mary, they've built something really cool,
Yeah.
and the community aspect of what we're doing is really cool. And of course, now there are options, but not only there are options, institutional LPs are starting to accept a level of technology. They're still not there, and it's gonna take time. But I think over time, especially with the outperformance of tiny funds, then something has to give.
Yeah.
And so there was this combination of eventually I realized that that's something that it was worth it to dedicate my entire life to, because it's longer than a marriage, right? I mean, well, hopefully mine is gonna be longer because I got married before launching the fund. But the aspiration is effectively to build a family of companies, of LPs and people that work with you, build a company, right? Not just a fund. It's a firm that happens to make money by charging fees on funds as products.
Yeah.
So there is this whole firm of the idea of changing venture in a way that is more, that I think I can contribute to. So there is that, and there is the fact that, again, it's now possible to do a very small fund and get started that way. But of course, we will scale, and of course, over time, we will grow. But something I never want to lose is that angel support. So, we have started with even very small checks. Now the check sizes increase, but there are smaller that I probably can put together into a syndicate in the final closing. And the idea is to continue to have an engaged community, because it's there, right? If you want to invest a pre-seed seed, and if you want to support entrepreneurs, I don't think, like I said before, I don't think you can teach that at scale. I think even accelerators is probably just a numbers game. You probably could do the same achievements with a spread and pray and connections. And in fact, the top accelerators in the world, I think they're very successful, not maybe because of what they teach, but because of the network that they've created of peers
it's the relationships
that you can plug
networks,
in, right?
Exactly,
and so with the community, that's going to continue to be there. Right now, it's an LPGP, because also that was an easy one that these platforms allow. Whether that is something that you can scale into for deep tech, I'm not sure. I've looked at some evergreen structures, and when we need to raise maybe fund 2, 3, 4, we're going to consider, because I'm not sure that a model where you should incentivize companies to keep growing, maybe even private, and you want to reap most of the rewards, works where by giving liquid, waiting for that to give liquidity.
It's harder with if one accepts it with deep tech. Typically the timescales are longer. Having an individual fund and rather than evergreen, you can't find the exits early enough to be able to recycle the capital.
At small scales it works because you can do secondaries, or you could have a couple of really extreme successes and you extend.
But you could miss out on the real extreme upside because you need to carve out.
So we'll see. I mean, the reality is that I think that people ask me, oh, that's a problem with deep tech. That's a problem with tech, because after Series B, deep tech takes a bit longer to get there. Recent deal room data shows that, and we've published it actually even on that article I mentioned before. But after a growth stage, and if you look at exits, good, successful, extremely successful software companies take more than 10, between 10 and
it's 13 and 16 years.
Exactly. So it's between 10 and 20 years for all companies in tech, because growth stage now exists as a thing across the world and actually, it was investing heavily in WeWorks and digital companies, right? So I think right now all venture probably needs to think whether the typical 10 plus 1 plus 1 is something that you can use at scale. And, someone like Sequoia has decided that it's not, and they changed. So we will see once you scale.
Amazing.
Once we scale.
Amazing. Look, I mean, I think one of the things that I think really comes out, right, is, or as you were talking, that really sort of came to me is, I work with a couple of deep tech, what I would consider deep tech businesses. And we can have a chat about whether they fit into that thesis later. But I don't come from that deep tech background. I certainly don't have, I'm not an engineer. I'm not a software engineer for that matter either. But I have a lot of interest in what opportunities that those businesses will provide for the world, right? And do think that the technology is actually incredibly valuable, incredibly interesting. But I wouldn't necessarily um, uh, without a lot of research, know that, you know, I would be the right person to write a check into that business. So the fact that you've built this community, that you have the angels that are able to co-invest with you, I think is super interesting, because it gives them an opportunity to learn, and to also essentially follow, you know, follow your intelligence in the space, as opposed to having to make the decision themselves. And I would imagine within deep tech, much more than software or pure kind of B2B SaaS, let's say, you know, in deep tech, it's probably harder to understand the commercial viability and the future opportunity and the scale, et cetera, than it is, well, okay, we have created, you know, this spreadsheet, you know, killer for this particular pain point within this particular vertical. That's understandable. Whereas with deep tech, it may be, you know, if you're investing, for argument's sake, in, I don't know, chips, or in, you know, image sensors, for argument's sake, for the layman, I don't necessarily, I understand what that market is, but I don't necessarily understand the technology, or how it's sort of deployed. So I think by structuring the fund in the way that you have, or by continuing to draw on the community and the angels, I think that's really positive, because it then allows other people to get more exposure, I guess, to deep tech and the sort of things you're investing in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, to be fair, I have to say that I've realized that even though it helps to empathize with founders in terms of being an engineer and, you know, being a technical person, I think that the thing that connects me to the biggest number of companies is the fact that I worked for a big part of my life in tech on digital signal processing, and always had a strong passion for physics. Actually, I was undecided between physics and computer science at uni, and I kept studying that on the side. So I think that even if, you know, you have done some technical studies in the past and left, or you're not, you know, as long as you have good passion for maths and physics and you really get into it and you develop your own culture there, at the end of the day, you don't have to build the business.
Yeah, of course.
So I think a lot of, you know, there's been too much of scaring, but I think a lot of people have been, you know, justifying not getting into deep tech investing because it's like, oh, I don't understand it. Probably the fact that you don't want to understand is what's stopping you, because if you want to spend time,
you'll figure it out.
You could probably figure it out, right? I mean, it's not, it can be rocket science, but here's the thing, you know, like that you can pick it up, right? I mean, obviously, if you're completely like, I hate maths, I hate physics, then of course, that's it, you know, that there's not much.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you like it, then, you know, I think there is more opportunities, especially later than pre-seed seed, right? Once you start to get into a business that starts to have also a commercial angle, and the value add that you can then bring is probably even that, you know, if you have different ways of looking at it.
Sure.
I think we need to just build a stronger ecosystem with different specialists that can do different things and add more value, and that's part of the reason why we're so collaborative and with our LP base, because I still remember one objection that I had when I was fundraising for first closing from one angel that was like, I don't really invest in funds. I only did it once because he was a mate, and I like to invest myself. I like to get involved with companies. I like to, you know, help out where I can. And I was like, do you think I don't need that?
Yeah,
like, you can give, if your problem is that you don't want me to manage your money, you want to be hands-on, trust me, I can bother you every week. And that's what's happening. We're on WhatsApp, we're on emails. Like, he's now helping very hands-on one of our portfolio founders on sales. So, and he's one of my best LPs, I have to say. Now, he's not the biggest, but he's definitely very valuable. And that has taught me that, to be fair, different people would invest different things, but you get so much more value from angels that put a check in your fund just as they would in a company. And then they act with you, like they would act with a company as an angel.
Yeah.
You need institutionals to scale.
Yeah.
But the best value you get it from people like that.
Yeah, for sure. I have to say, I loved maths and physics growing up, but then I became an accountant. So that probably wiped out every single aspect of both of those subjects. Francesco, it's been absolutely amazing having you on the podcast with me today. I really appreciate your time. For our audience, where's the best place for them to find you online? Are you on LinkedIn, Twitter?
Yeah, on LinkedIn. I mean, I tend to be fairly responsive. My inbox is so far okay. Obviously, I'm a solo GP, so I need to be very strict. I try to turn people down pretty quickly on the founder side. If it's not deep tech infrastructure in Europe at seed, it's probably a no already, but okay. And even if it is, then I, you know, only you can only invest in so many companies if you have a concentrated portfolio. And then what else? And then we do events. To be fair, actually, if you do want to come to our webinars and live events in London, then it's an even better way to catch up, because we actually take the time to do networking and catching up, and it's a great way to network with other people that is not me, but it might be our LPs, it might be other founders. So definitely the events. I am on LinkedIn. I write a lot. I actually love feedback when people tell me whether I write something good or bad. What else? And then my email is francesco@siliconroundabout.ventures. And so I'm fairly easy to reach.
Yeah.
I always struggling to catch up, but if it is on point and just, if I see that there is a way in which I can add value, then of course I can respond.
Amazing. I have to come to an event. I set myself the task this year to get out to more events, and Silicon Roundabout is definitely on my list to get out to more than once, a couple of your events. So in the meantime, thank you, Francesco, so much for coming onto the podcast, joining me in the studio. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Thanks to you, Aarish.